Hands up, right now, or I shoot. Darian Cross looked straight down the barrel and didn't move. He had just taken down an active shooter, stripped the weapon, held the man face down on a supermarket floor while a 71-year-old's blood spread slowly toward the cereal aisle. And now the person pointing a gun at him was a police officer from his own department, looking at him and seeing exactly one thing. She had chosen the wrong man. And she wouldn't know that for another 6.5 hours. If you believe stopping a mass shooting doesn't mean you deserve to be handcuffed, hit like and subscribe right now. This story is not over. Narrator. Thursday, 4:47 p.m. Greenway Market, a mid-range chain grocery on the east side of Halcourt, Florida, was deep in the evening rush. Fun shopping carts clattered at the end of the aisles. The PA system was announcing a sale on whole milk. A child somewhere around 3 years old was crying because his mother wouldn't buy candy. The smell of raw meat and floor cleaner rose together from somewhere near the back. Darian Cross stood in front of the refrigerated case in the meat section, comparing 2 packs of chicken breast. Gray t-shirt, dark jeans, worn sneakers. Nothing that made anyone look twice. He placed 1 pack in the cart, next to a box of Cheerios for his daughter Mia and 2 cartons of orange juice. Then checked his phone for the list. Flour. He still needed flour. This was his first day off in 12 days. He had no intention of letting it run past 30 minutes. He started pushing the cart toward the flour aisle and stopped. Not because he saw something, because he heard something that didn't fit. Footsteps. Heavy. Steady. Coming from the direction of the main entrance. But not the rhythm of someone shopping. No cartwheels, no rustling bags. Just rubber soles hitting linoleum in measured, purposeful intervals, moving faster than anyone else in this building. Cross didn't turn his head. He continued pushing the cart, slowing slightly, and adjusted his angle so he could use the glass panel above the meat case as a mirror. A man, black tactical jacket, light auburn hair, around 40, walking a straight line toward checkout lane 3, where an elderly man was unloading a small basket. Cross looked at the man's right hand. Then he stopped completely. At 4:51 p.m., a female dispatcher's voice cut across the radio frequency covering all patrol units on Halcourt's east side. Dispatch log GL 4417. Thursday, 1651. Caller reports active shooter in progress, Greenway Market, aisle 3. Suspect described as male, white, tactical vest, handgun. Multiple victims possible, all east units, code 13. By the time that log entry was transmitted, Cross was no longer standing near the meat case, aerator. He moved on a diagonal, not running, not shouting, not doing anything that would cause a crowd surge before he could control the situation. Brett Lohman, the name he would learn later. From an arrest report, he would have to read under circumstances no one in that building could have predicted. Was approximately 4 meters from checkout lane 3 when he pulled the gun from inside his jacket. Ernie Bales, 71 years old, retired, who came to this supermarket every Thursday afternoon to buy enough for the weekend, was reaching for his debit card when the shot went off. The bullet caught him in the left shoulder. He went down between the sound of breaking glass and a jar of pasta sauce knocked from the conveyor belt. Screaming broke from every direction. Cross was 15 meters out, closing fast. Lohman raised the weapon toward the young woman standing at checkout lane 3, her 2 children gripping her from both sides. The older one, maybe 5, hadn't understood yet what was happening. No, the younger one was already crying. Cross came in from the left, Lohman's blind side. No time to calculate. No time for anything except putting his body in the right position in the space of 1 second. He dropped his center of gravity, left hand seizing Lohman's right wrist, driving the barrel away from the woman and children, right arm hooking behind the neck, not to choke, just to break the balance. Then he threw his full body weight forward and pulled Lohman down with him. Both men hit the floor. Lohman thrashed. An elbow swung back and connected with Cross's jaw, rattling him for a half-second. He didn't let go. He pinned Lohman's right hand under his knee and torqued the wrist backward until the gun came loose. He picked it up with his right hand, dropped the magazine, racked the slide to clear the chambered round, on all of it in 4 seconds. Then he set the unloaded weapon to the side, hands clean, and resumed holding Lohman face down against the floor, knee across the lower back, both arms pinned behind. He didn't have handcuffs. He was wearing a t-shirt. Customers erupted around him. Someone called 911. Someone else knelt beside Ernie Bales. The young woman pulled her children into her chest and didn't look away from Cross. Trey Hollis, the store's loss prevention officer, 24 years old, working the afternoon shift, stood near the produce section with his phone up, recording. He didn't know he had just started capturing the most important evidence in this case. Narrator. 2 minutes and 30 seconds later, the automatic doors of Greenway Market slid open. Rachel Voss came through first. Cam Seong was a step behind her. Now Voss, 37, 11 years on the job, with a kind of sharp, decisive tone her colleagues called efficient, swept the room in under 2 seconds. This is what Voss saw. A black man in civilian clothes holding a white man face down on the floor. A gun nearby, blood spreading across the linoleum. An elderly man being supported by a bystander. Chaos everywhere. This is what Voss did not see. Sequence, context, the direction of the action. This is what Voss chose not to look for. Let him go. Hands up, right now. Cross looked up. He recognized her, not from working together, but from a department-wide meeting 6 months ago. Officer Voss. His voice was level. I'm holding the suspect for you. He's the shooter. The weapon has been cleared and set aside. I said hands up. Customers erupted from every direction. No, he saved us. The young mother screamed, her voice cracking apart. That man is the shooter. The white man, in the vest. He's a detective. A middle-aged man near the bread aisle shouted. He stopped the shooting. You've got the wrong person. Check the cameras. The store manager, a brunette woman standing behind the customer service counter, called across the floor. The entrance camera. I watched the whole thing. Voss didn't look at the cameras. Didn't look at the young mother. Didn't look at the manager. She looked at Cross, and she stepped forward. I need you to release that man and put your hands behind your head. Now. Seong stood 2 steps behind Voss. He looked at the customers. Looked at the camera mounted in the upper left corner. Looked at Voss. Said nothing. Cross released Lohman's arms, slowly, each movement deliberate, giving Voss no reason to pull the trigger. Then straightened up and raised both hands to shoulder height. My name is Darian Cross. His volume didn't change. I'm prepared to cooperate fully, but I need you to verify my identity before any further procedure. That is standard protocol. On the floor, Lohman lifted his head. He's my accomplice. Lohman's voice came out raw and fast. We were together. He turned on me. He fired first. Voss looked down at Lohman. Looked up at Cross. 1 second. Then she reached for her handcuffs. Narrator. Cam Seong stood still for 3 seconds. 3 seconds he would never stop thinking about. then moved toward Lohman to cuff him. At the same moment, Voss moved toward Cross. Voss pressed Cross forward, pulling his arms behind his back. "And you have the wrong person." Xiong said it quietly, just loud enough for Voss to hear. "I'm working with what I can see." "Rach." "Xiong." Her voice cut across his. "Hold the crowd back." Xiong looked at Cross one more time. The man's eyes held nothing but a cold, measured calm, then turned away and began steering customers toward the exit. On the floor, Lohman still hadn't been cuffed. Trey Hollis was still recording. And as Voss guided Cross toward the exit, Trey panned left, just enough to catch Lohman's face as the man slowly pushed himself up from the floor while no one was watching him anymore. Trey's live stream at that moment had 700 viewers. 5 minutes later, while Cross sat in the back of Voss's patrol car, that number crossed 1 million. A narrator. Here is what Cross knew about himself during the next 20 minutes, sitting in the back of that patrol car with his hands cuffed behind him. He knew he could not panic, not because panic was weakness, but because panic would cost him the only thing working in his favor right now: the ability to think more clearly than anyone else in the room. He ran through it mentally. Request that any interrogation be recorded. Request the names of all witnesses present at the scene. Do not sign anything before consulting legal counsel. Demand that Captain Ruth Aldane be notified immediately. He didn't write it down. Didn't need to. He looked out the car window. Still light. The man who had been shot, Ernie Bales, was being loaded into an ambulance. He hoped the old man would be all right. He thought about Brett Lohman, still standing inside that supermarket, uncuffed, undetained. He thought about Mia, at home, waiting for her father to come back with her Cheerios. Then he stopped thinking about things he couldn't control and focused on the things he still could. Narrator. 12 days before the supermarket, before Voss, before any of it, Darian Cross closed case file number 207 at the Halcourt Criminal Investigations Division. The case was the Meridian Street double homicide. 2 victims, no witnesses. The suspect had fled the state within 14 hours. Cross traced the man through a prepaid phone, an ATM receipt, and a torn lottery ticket that no one else had thought to log as evidence, over 72 hours straight, until the suspect was picked up in Georgia. He filed the closing report at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. Organized the documents by color: green for witnesses, yellow for physical evidence, red for court orders. Then transferred everything to an archival box and wrote the timestamp on the lid in black marker: Meridian/Cross/714/Tuesday. His colleague, Detective Pauline Ung, sitting across the desk, glanced over. "You just wrote the time on the storage box." "Yeah. Nobody does that?" "I do." Ung looked at him for a moment, then shook her head slightly and turned back to her screen. That was hint number 1. Not for Ung, but for anyone who watched him long enough to notice. This was a man who documented everything. Everything got a timestamp. Everything had a sequence. He didn't do it because he was trained to. He did it because that was how he thought. So, narrator. The first day after closing the Meridian case, Cross came in earlier than usual to finish a supplemental report. He sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and a new employee, 3 weeks in, brown hair, badge lanyard reading Harmon, walked over. "Sorry, are you waiting for someone?" Cross looked up from the screen. "No." "Oh." Harmon glanced around. "I thought this desk was... I didn't see anyone sitting here regularly." "I've sat here for 12 years. Cross said it evenly, no elaboration. Harmon's face reddened and he moved away quickly. Cross watched him go for a moment. No anger, no surprise. Then turned back to the screen. This was not the first time. It would not be the last. Narrator. 3 days after that, in the morning division briefing, our Cross proposed updating the field verification protocol, specifically requiring officers to confirm the identity of all individuals present before assigning suspect or victim classifications, particularly in multi-person situations. Sergeant Lena Whitmore, running the meeting, sitting at the head of the table with a coffee cup that never seemed to leave her hand, looked at Cross over the rim and gave the kind of slow nod that everyone in the room understood to mean, "I've heard you and I will do nothing with this." "That's not a priority this month, Cross." "Understood. If there's bandwidth next month, I'll raise it again." Whitmore held on him for a beat. She didn't like that answer. Too clean, nothing to push back on. Moving on. She shifted to the next item on the agenda. Cross wrote in his small notebook, "Field verification proposal, denied, LW, Monday, 9/22. Then he closed the notebook and kept listening. Narrator. Thursday afternoon, the day he drove to Greenway Market. Captain Ruth Aldane stopped by Cross's desk before the end of the shift. Cross. She glanced at his screen. "Did you finish the Meridian Supplemental?" "Filed Tuesday morning, Captain." Aldane nodded. "Go home. You've worked 12 days straight." "I'm heading out now." "Not now. Now means you leave in an hour. I mean, now." She gave him the kind of half-smile that wasn't performative. The kind that came from watching someone long enough to know they'd stay another hour if no one physically moved them toward the door. "Your daughter needs her father at home, not here." "Yes, Captain." He shut down his laptop. He grabbed his keys. And he drove to Greenway Market to buy flour, a box of Cheerios for Mia, and 2 cartons of orange juice. Nothing else. Narrator. Trey Hollis started watching Cross from the moment he came through the automatic doors. Not because Trey was a bad person, but because Trey, 24 years old, tasked with watching for anyone who looked like they weren't there to shop, was running a mental filter that his employee handbook didn't explicitly name, but also didn't bother to examine. Cross clocked him by the second aisle. Trey was pretending to check a shelf of canned goods while keeping his eyes angled toward Cross. Cross didn't stop walking, didn't change his pace, just continued pushing the cart toward the meat section. He had been watched like this for longer than Trey had been alive. Narrator. And then, at 4:51 p.m., everything changed. Not gradually, not in steps. In the space of one gunshot and one decision made without enough information. Narrator. The Halcourt Police Department sat on Calder Street, 4 floors, built in the 1980s, with windows that had turned a faint amber from decades of sun exposure. 3rd floor was criminal investigations. 1st floor was booking and the temporary holding cells. Wells Pardee, administrative officer, 52, thinning hair, the manner of a man who had spent enough time behind a desk to believe the desk was what protected him, was working the afternoon shift when Voss brought Cross in. Name. Cross looked at him. "I've provided my identity 3 times at the scene. I'm requesting that Captain Aldane be..." "After booking is complete." Pardee didn't look up. He's typing something into his terminal. "This is the first time I'm making that request on record." Cross kept his voice level. "I want that documented." Pardee looked up for the first time since Cross walked in. 1 second. Name. Cross gave it to him, not because he was surrendering, but because he understood that measured cooperation carried more tactical value in this situation than direct confrontation. Pardee typed, stopped, typed again. Stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary. Then he entered something else. Cross couldn't see the monitor and continued the intake process. Sit over there. I'm requesting Captain. Processing. That was the first time Party said processing. He would say it 2 more times in the next 2 hours. Once each time Cross renewed his request to verify his identity. And it was the first time Cross understood that this situation was more complicated than he'd initially read. Narrator: Darian Cross walked into the Halcourt Police Department at 5:17 p.m. 8 minutes after Cross was brought in. Cross was the attorney for the Halcourt Police Officers Association. A man in his early 50s wearing a gray suit and carrying the particular expression of someone who had long ago decided that showing emotion was a liability. He walked to the front desk, said something in a low voice to the officer on duty, and took a seat in the waiting area. No one had filed a request for his presence. No paperwork had been submitted. No case had been formally opened to require his involvement. He was simply there. Cross observed him from the waiting area through the glass partition. He noted the time, 5:17 p.m., noted the face, noted the suit, and noted the question he didn't yet have an answer to. Who had called Cross, and from what time? Narrator: Lena Whitmore arrived at the booking area at 5:45 p.m. Not because anyone had asked her to, not because she was on shift. She came carrying a thin folder, Voss's incident report, freshly filed, and stood reading it while Party continued typing at his terminal. Cross was sitting in the waiting area about 5 meters away, close enough to hear if she spoke at a normal register. Whitmore turned through the pages, gave one slow, deliberate nod. Procedure was followed correctly. Party didn't look up. Yes, Sergeant. Whitmore set the folder down on the counter. Continue processing. Then she turned and walked out. She never looked at Cross once. Cross didn't speak. He watched her back until she disappeared through the door. Then he looked down. In his right front pocket was a grocery receipt, left over from last week's run, never thrown away. He took it out, turned it over, pulled the short pencil stub he always kept in his back pocket. He wrote, LW, 1745. Procedure was followed correctly. Then he folded the receipt and held it in his left palm, out of anyone's line of sight, and kept waiting. Narrator: 6 p.m. Cross had been inside the Halcourt Police Department for 1 hour and 13 minutes. Ernie Bales was in surgery at Halcourt General. The shoulder wound, the doctors said, had missed the artery. He was lucky. Brett Lohman was somewhere that no one in this building could identify. Trey Hollis's video had 3.2 million views, declining by 100,000 every 15 minutes. And Cam Seong was sitting in his patrol car in the rear lot, phone in hand, looking at the screen with the face of a man choosing between 2 things that both had a price. Narrator: Seong called Detective Renard Okello, the person he had shadowed as a trainee 4 years earlier, before Okello transferred to a federal task force. Okello. It's me. Seong looked through the windshield at the back lot. I've got a situation. Go. Seong laid it out, every detail in order. When he finished, Okello was quiet for 10 seconds. My phone screen is projecting onto the wall right now, Okello said. You know this video is going viral? Yeah. Are you in it? Yeah. A pause. Seong, if the store camera is as clear as what I'm looking at on my phone, you're going to be asked questions. Not if, when. Seong looked out the side window. I know. What did you do when it happened? Seong didn't answer immediately. I stood still, he finally said. Okello didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Seong ended the call, sat for another 5 minutes. Then he pulled a report form from the glove compartment, the internal witness statement template every officer kept in the car, and started writing. His hand was slightly unsteady, not from fear, but because he knew that once this page was filed, there was no walking it back. Narrator. He wrote for 17 minutes. Not a dramatic account, not an accusation. Just what he saw, in chronological order, with timestamps he remembered accurately because he had checked his watch when Voss came through the supermarket doors. He went inside, walked to the duty room, set the page on the desk of the officer on watch. Supplemental witness statement, case GL-2209. The officer looked at him for a beat, looked at the page. Thanks, Seong. Seong nodded, turned, walked out into the hallway, and stopped just outside the door, standing in the empty corridor with his hands in his pockets, looking at the space in front of him. Then he exhaled, slow, and kept walking. It wasn't heroic. No one applauded. No one even knew. But the page was on that desk. And in this system, sometimes one handwritten page in a quiet hallway is the only thing that makes any difference at all. Narrator. At 6:20 p.m., Voss stopped outside the waiting area and looked through the glass at Cross. He was sitting with his back straight, hands on his thighs, eyes fixed on the middle distance. Voss watched him for 15 seconds, with the expression of someone waiting for the first sign of panic or anger or anything that would confirm she had been right. He gave her nothing. She turned away. Narrator. At 6:51 p.m., Trey Hollis was standing in the Greenway Market parking lot, the store sealed and taped as a crime scene, with his phone vibrating continuously from numbers he didn't recognize. Voss had approached him about an hour earlier while he was still inside. I need you to delete that personal footage. She stood closer than a normal conversation required. This is an active crime scene. Unauthorized recording may constitute obstruction of the investigation. Trey looked at her. He was a loss prevention officer, not a cop, not a lawyer. But he knew enough to recognize that no specific legal authority had been cited. I was recording in a semi-public space with my employer's implicit permission. His voice wasn't particularly confident, but he didn't step back. I don't think you have the authority to compel me to delete that content. Voss moved half a step closer, didn't touch him. But the pressure of that distance was clear. You're obstructing an active crime scene. I stopped recording when you asked me to. Trey held his phone up flat, screen forward. The stream was still live. But the content was already being broadcast. It's on the internet. I can't delete that. Voss looked at the phone, looked at him. A muscle near her right eye pulled tight once. Then she turned and walked away, without another word. Trey held still until she was out of sight. Then he looked down at his phone. The live stream was showing 4,002,000 viewers. And let out a slow breath. He didn't know he had just done the most important thing of his life. He only knew he hadn't done the wrong thing. Sometimes that's the entire difference. Narrator. At 7:30 p.m., Cross was sitting in holding cell 4 on the first floor of the Halcourt Police Department. Not his first time in a holding cell. He had walked hundreds of people into rooms like this one over 12 years. But this was the first time he had sat on the other side of that door. The cell had a metal bench bolted to the wall, a narrow sleeping shelf, and a fluorescent light that produced the kind of cold white brightness that leaves no shadow in any corner, the smell of disinfectant and old metal. He was aware that 3 flights of stairs above him, his desk was empty. The Meridian archive box was in storage. The coffee from this morning, still a little left at the bottom of the cup, was going cold on the surface of his desk. He thought about Mia, 8 years old, probably asking her mother why her dad wasn't home yet. He didn't allow himself to stay there longer than 10 seconds. Instead, he looked at the grocery receipt folded in his left palm, the only piece of paper he still had on him, with what he'd written on the back before they brought him in here. LW, 1745. Procedure was followed correctly. He looked at those words, looked at the timestamp. Then he refolded the receipt along its original creases and held it in his palm. He closed his eyes, leaned his back against the cold metal wall, and began to wait. Not because he was giving up, but because he understood that in this situation, down on the first floor, in holding cell 4, 3 flights of stairs from his own desk, the only thing he could do was keep his head clear and wait until someone in this building registered what was actually happening. The question was not whether someone would. The question was who and how long. Narrator. At 7:45 p.m., a department health officer named Vera Okafor, 35, working the night shift, came to holding cell 4 for a routine welfare check. She looked at Cross through the door glass. He was sitting with his back straight, eyes closed, the posture of someone resting deliberately, not someone coming apart. She opened the cell door. "Are you injured?" Cross opened his eyes. "No." Okafor studied him for a moment, her eyes reading his face the way someone does when they've spent years gauging how much a person is actually holding together versus how much they're performing. "Mr. Cross." Her voice dropped slightly. "Is there anything I can do?" Not sir, not buddy. His name exactly. The way someone uses it when they've read it off a booking form, or when they recognize who they're looking at and are choosing not to say so out loud. Cross looked at her steadily. "Notify Captain Ruth Aldane on the 3rd floor that I'm down here." He said it the way he said everything, flat, clear, without urgency. "If you're able to." Okafor gave one short, firm nod. Then she closed the door and left. Cross watched until the sound of her footsteps faded at the end of the corridor. Then he closed his eyes again. A narrator. At 8:03 p.m., Captain Ruth Aldane's phone rang for the 17th time that evening. The first 16, from colleagues, reporters, and a number she didn't recognize. She had let go to voicemail because she was 2 hours into a budget review with the deputy director. The 17th was from Vera Okafor, a name she knew. She answered it. 20 seconds later, she ended the call, stood up from the conference table, and told the deputy director, "I need to step out for a moment." She did not return to that meeting. Narrator. She took the stairs, didn't wait for the elevator, didn't explain herself to anyone. 4 flights down at the kind of speed that people who knew her would have recognized as the pace she moves at when something is happening and she's already decided what she's going to do about it. She went straight to the booking area. Pardee looked up. "Captain, GL2209. Her voice was not loud, but there was something in the register of it that made Pardee stop everything he was doing. "Which cell is the subject in?" Pardee looked at his screen. "Cell 4, Captain, but the standard procedure—" "I asked which cell, not what the procedure is." One beat. "Cell 4. Aldane walked toward the door that led to the holding wing. The guard on post, reading her rank insignia, opened it without a word. She walked down the corridor, stopped in front of cell 4, looked through the glass at the man sitting with his back straight against the metal wall, eyes closed, hands flat on his thighs. She recognized him in half a second. Then she put her hand on the door handle. A narrator. The lock disengaged, heavy and final, and Cross opened his eyes. He looked at the door. Aldane stepped inside. She didn't speak immediately. She took him in, his condition, his composure, the folded piece of paper held in the flat of his left hand. And that look lasted exactly 1 second before she said, "Let's go, Darian." 2 words, not an apology, not a speech, not an explanation. Just 2 words. And the weight of 8 hours and everything still unsaid was sitting inside them. Cross stood up. Slowly, each movement deliberate. He put the receipt in his pocket. Then he walked out of holding cell 4. Same building as his desk, same building as his files, same building as 12 years of his working life. And stood in the corridor. The fluorescent light out here was the same as inside. Same smell of metal and disinfectant. But the door behind him was open. Aldane stood beside him, looking straight ahead. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Brett Lohman hasn't been apprehended." "I know." She nodded, slowly, the way someone does when they're rebalancing weight on a decision that can no longer be reversed. "We'll talk about next steps. But first," she looked at him, "I need to know you're all right." Cross looked straight ahead. For 1 second, just one, the controlled surface showed something underneath. Not anger, not tears, but the particular exhaustion of a person who did the right thing and paid for it. Then it closed again. "I'm fine." He said it cleanly. "We need to locate Lohman before he disappears." Aldane held on him for another moment. Then she nodded, turned toward the corridor. "Yes," she said. "We need to find Lohman." This story is just getting started. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, when everything that happened today gets laid out on a table in front of the people who have no room left to deny it. Narrator. Outside the Halcourt Police Department, at 8:17 p.m., Yolanda Marsh, investigative reporter for the Halcourt Tribune, 38, who had been watching Trey Hollis's video since it had fewer than 2 million views, was standing on the sidewalk across from the building with a notebook in her hand. She had called the department's press information office 7 times since 5 p.m. 7 times she received the same answer. No comment at this time. But Marsh hadn't come here for a comment. She'd come because in Trey Hollis's live stream, she were at the 27-second mark when Voss was moving toward Cross and Cross raised his hands. The camera had briefly focused on a lanyard that had swung free from Cross's collar during the takedown. The lanyard held no photo, just a number. Marsh had screenshotted the frame, zoomed in, read the digits, 4418. She didn't know what that number meant yet, but she knew how to find out. Narrator. At 8:22 p.m., Marsh's phone buzzed. A text from a source inside the department. Someone she had cultivated over 5 years, someone who had never been wrong. The man in the video? Badge 4418. Homicide Division, 3rd floor. They just released him. Marsh looked at the message, looked up at the building. Then she closed her notebook and started moving toward the main entrance. Not to go inside, and to stand in exactly the right position outside. The right angle, the right distance from the door, and wait for the moment it opened. She wouldn't have to wait long. Narrator. At 8:35 p.m., Cross walked out of the Halcourt Police Department for the first time since he'd been brought in with his hands behind his back. Full dark outside. The streetlights on Calder threw pale orange against the wet pavement. It had rained briefly around 7, which he hadn't known because he was underground. Aldane stood beside him. Neither of them spoke. Marsh was 20 meters away, notebook open. Cross saw her. She saw him. For several seconds, no one moved. Then Cross turned to Aldane. "Reporter?" "Probably." Aldane glanced toward Marsh. "Do you want to—" "Not tonight," Cross said it without edge or defense. Just a decision. Not until we have Lohman. Aldane nodded. They turned toward the parking lot, leaving Marsh on the sidewalk with her notebook still open and the digits 4418 written alone at the top of a blank page. She watched them until the car was gone. Then she looked back down at the page and started writing. Not about what she'd just seen, about where those digits were going to take her. Narrator. Brett Lohman was arrested 9 days later at a gas station in Savannah, Georgia. Caught when a clerk recognized his face from the evening news broadcast. Ernie Bales was discharged from Halcourt General after 11 days. The shoulder wound would leave permanent damage, limited range of motion for the rest of his life. His surgeon said he was luckier than he had any right to be. And Wells Pardee, the man who had typed Darian Cross's name into the booking system at 5 p.m., stared at the screen longer than he needed to, and continued the intake procedure as though nothing in that screen required any action. Was sitting at his desk at 9 a.m. the following morning when Yolanda Marsh filed the first Freedom of Information Act request for case GL2-209. The request covered all booking system logs from 4 p.m. to midnight on Thursday. All internal department emails referencing case GL2209. All body cam footage from every officer present at Greenway Market. Pardee looked at the request. Then he looked at his terminal. And he remembered that at 5:06 p.m. on Thursday, 1 minute after Brett Lohman walked out of that supermarket, he had sent an email to an address he hadn't thought about since the moment he hit send. But Marsh was thinking about it now. And within 60 days, when the FOIA was processed and the documents were delivered, she would be holding a printed copy of that email, with the recipient field unredacted. Narrator. The FOIA request landed on the department's legal desk at 9:14 a.m. on Friday. By 9:30, 3 people inside the Halcourt Police Department knew about it. By 10 o'clock, Dorian Crew had been briefed. Pardee found out at 10:12, when his supervisor knocked on his office door, set a printed copy of the request on his desk, and left without saying anything. The silence was its own kind of message. Pardee stared at the paper for a long time. Then he opened his email client and looked at the sent folder. The email was still there. 5:06 p.m. Subject line. Re. GL-2209. The body of the message was 4 sentences long. The recipient address was a department email, internal, routed through the Halcourt PD server, which meant it was subject to disclosure under Florida's Broad Public Records Law, Chapter 119 of the Florida Statutes. Pardee had known that when he sent it. He had sent it anyway. He closed the email, opened it again, read it one more time. Then he closed his laptop and sat looking at the wall. Narrator. Cross came in at 7:40 a.m. that Friday. He had slept 4 hours, not because he couldn't sleep longer, but because there was work to do, and his body had a decades-long habit of waking up when there was work to do. He showered, made coffee, and he sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes, while the house was still quiet, and his wife Adele slept and Mia's backpack sat by the front door waiting for the school bus. He didn't tell Adele everything the night before. He told her enough, that there had been an incident, that he was fine, that it would need to be dealt with. And she had looked at him across the kitchen table with the expression she had been developing for 12 years. The one that meant, I believe you and I hate this simultaneously. And then she had reached across and put her hand over his without saying anything. He had not been able to explain to her why that was the hardest moment of the entire day. He drove to the department, took the stairs, walked past the holding area without looking at it, sat down at his desk, The coffee cup from yesterday was still there. Oh, he threw it out. Haldane came by at 7:55. How are you doing? Working. She looked at his desk, clean, organized, the way it always was. Internal Affairs has been notified. They'll want to speak with you, probably this week. I'll be available. Cross. She waited until he looked up. You're allowed to be angry. He looked at her for a moment. I know, he said. I'm choosing to be useful instead. Haldane held on him for another second. Then she nodded, the kind that meant she understood and also wasn't going to push, and walked back to her office. Cross opened his laptop and started pulling everything he could remember from the previous afternoon into a written account, time-stamped in chronological order. Before any more of the detail eroded, he wrote for 2 hours without stopping. My narrator. The body cam footage from Rachel Voss's unit camera, badge number 1147, case GL2209, was downloaded from the department server on the morning after the incident by IT specialist Dana Osei, working under a preservation order signed by the duty lieutenant at 11 p.m. Thursday night. Osei logged the download at 8:47 a.m. Friday, assigned it a chain of custody number, and transferred it to a secured evidence folder with dual access authentication. The footage ran 43 minutes. The first 11 minutes, from the moment Voss entered Greenway Market to the moment Cross's hands were secured behind his back, would become the most examined 11 minutes of video in the Halcourt Police Department's institutional history. But it was what the footage showed at the 40-second mark that stopped everyone who watched it cold. 42 seconds after entering the store, Voss's body cam captured the store manager standing behind the customer service counter, calling across the floor, "Check the entrance camera. I watched the whole thing." Voss's camera tracked left, toward the manager, for approximately 1.5 seconds. Then it tracked back to Cross. No acknowledgement, no response, no radio call to request camera access. The footage continued. Narrator. The Internal Affairs Division of the Halcourt PD occupied a suite of offices on the second floor. Between criminal investigations above and booking below, which had always struck Cross as an unintentionally accurate metaphor for what IA actually was. The layer that existed between the system's authority and its consequences. Investigator Peter Fossey ran the division. He was 51, methodical in the way that people who have seen institutional cover-ups from the inside tend to become methodical. Not out of cynicism, but out of a specific understanding that the details are where the truth lives, and the details are also where the truth gets buried. Fossey opened the GL2209 review file on Friday afternoon. By the end of that day, he had watched the body cam footage 4 times, read Seong's handwritten statement twice, and made a list of 17 questions that the existing documentation did not answer. The most important of those questions was not about Voss, but it was about the email Pardee sent at 5:06 p.m. to an address that the preliminary records showed as belonging to a supervisor in the Administrative Services Division. A supervisor who had no operational connection to GL2209. No reason to be informed about a booking intake within minutes of the suspect's arrival. No documented reason to be in the loop at all. Fossey wrote the name at the top of a fresh page and underlined it twice. Then he picked up the phone and called the AG's regional office. Narrator. Simone Quay arrived in Halcourt on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the incident. She was 39, an attorney with the Florida Attorney General's Civil Rights Division, and she had driven 4 hours from Tallahassee carrying 2 briefcases and the particular calm of someone who had learned not to signal what she was thinking until she was ready to act on it. She was not there to prosecute. Not yet. She was there as an observer, present at the Internal Affairs disciplinary proceedings as a representative of the AG's office, watching the process, documenting whether that process was being conducted with integrity or being conducted in the way that processes in institutions sometimes are, when the institution is primarily interested in protecting itself. She met with Fosse first. 1 hour, door closed. She met with Cross the following morning. 2 hours. Cross came with a manila folder containing his written account, the grocery receipt with Whitmore's words on the back, and a printed copy of every request for verification he had made during his time in booking. Reconstructed from memory, time-stamped, with a note at the bottom that read, "These times are approximate. Exact times should be verifiable against the booking system log." Quay read through the folder without speaking. When she finished, she looked up. "You kept the receipt." "I keep everything." She looked at him for a moment. "Mr. Cross, I want to be direct with you about what I can and can't do from where I'm sitting. Please. I can observe the IA proceedings and report my findings to the AG. I can flag concerns about procedural integrity. I can recommend further investigation if the evidence warrants it." She set the folder down. "What I cannot do is guarantee any particular outcome. I cannot promise you that the people who failed you will face consequences proportional to what they did. The system moves the way it moves." Cross nodded. "I know how the system moves. I thought you might." She picked up her pen. "Tell me about the email." Narrator. The email became the center of everything. Not because its contents were explosive, 4 sentences, professionally worded, nothing that could be described as a direct order or an explicit instruction to do anything improper, but because of the timestamp, because of the recipient, and because of what the recipient did and didn't do in the 90 minutes that followed. Party's email, sent at 5:06 p.m., read as follows. Re. GL-2209. Subject booked under booking ref B-0449. Intake proceeding per standard protocol. Will advise on status as situation develops. The recipient was listed in the department directory as Assistant Director of Administrative Services, Gordon Hale. Gordon Hale had been with the Halcourt PD for 19 years. He sat on the department's internal promotions board. He was Lena Whitmore's direct supervisor. He had never, in any documented capacity, been involved in a field arrest booking before. Fosse's team pulled Hale's email activity for the Thursday in question. Hale had received Party's message at 5:08 p.m. He had opened it at 5:11. He had not responded. He had not forwarded it. He had not called Party back. What he had done at 5:13 p.m. was send a separate email to a recipient whose address was not in the department directory, but routed through a personal account, with a subject line that read, "Handled." The body of that email was blank. That email had been captured only because Hale had sent it from a department device, which meant it passed through the department server and fell within the scope of Marsh's FOIA request. When Fosse showed it to Quay, she looked at it for a long time without speaking. "Who's the recipient?" Cross asked, the day Fosse briefed him. "We're still working on that." Fosse said it without apology. The account was created 6 weeks ago. It's been dormant since Thursday evening. Cross looked at the printed email in his hands. One word in the subject line. Handled. Sent at 5:13 p.m., 7 minutes after Lohman walked out of Greenway Market. At 91 minutes before Aldane walked down 4 flights of stairs to open the door of holding cell 4. He folded the paper along a clean crease and set it on Fosse's desk. "I'd like a copy of that for my records," he said. Fosse slid it back across the desk. "Keep that one." Narrator. 6 weeks after the incident, the Internal Affairs disciplinary hearing convened on a Wednesday morning in Conference Room 2B of the Hull Court PD, a room with a rectangular table, 8 chairs, water pitchers at each end, and windows that looked out onto the roof of the parking garage. The panel consisted of 3 people: Fosse as the presiding IA investigator, Deputy Chief Mara Vento, representing department leadership, and a civilian oversight board member named Theodore Anand. You're an attorney in private practice who served on the board in a voluntary capacity. Voss sat on one side of the table with Dorian Crew beside her. Crew had 2 legal pads, a mechanical pencil, and the expression of a man who considered every hearing a transaction to be managed rather than a truth to be found. Cross sat on the other side with his written account, the bodycam timestamp printout, and the copy of Pardee email chain that Fosse had given him. He had no attorney with him. He had been offered representation through the department's procedures, and he had declined, not out of stubbornness, but because he had read the documentation carefully enough to know that what he was going to say required no interpretation. Quay sat at a chair against the wall, slightly separated from the table, observer status, a yellow legal pad on her knee. Fosse opened the proceedings at 9:02 a.m. This is an Internal Affairs disciplinary hearing in the matter of Case GL-2209. The hearing will examine the conduct of Officer Rachel Voss and Administrative Officer Wells Pardee in connection with events occurring on Thursday at Greenway Market and subsequently at the Hull Court Police Department booking facility. The panel will hear from all relevant parties. Findings will be issued within 30 days. He paused, looked around the room. We'll begin with the incident report. Narrator. Crew moved first, before the incident report had even been fully read into the record. Before we proceed, I want to raise a foundational objection. He set his mechanical pencil down with the deliberateness of a man who understood that small gestures in enclosed rooms carry weight. The body cam footage that has been designated as primary evidence in this matter. I'm requesting confirmation that proper authentication procedures under Department Protocol 7B were followed before this footage is relied upon by the panel. Fosse looked at him without expression. The footage was downloaded from the department server on the morning following the incident. Download logged at 08:47 a.m. by IT specialist Dana Osei, under preservation order signed by the duty lieutenant the prior evening. Chain of custody documentation is in the panel's exhibit packet, tab 3. Crew picked up his pencil again, made a note. I'd like the opportunity to question Specialist Osei regarding the download procedure. Specialist Osei submitted a written authentication declaration, which is also in tab 3. Fosse's tone didn't change. If counsel requires additional clarification, that request can be submitted in writing within 5 business days of this hearing's conclusion. Crew looked at his legal pad. Crew looked at the panel. Crew made a decision that experienced attorneys make when they realize the ground they chose to contest is not going to yield. Noted, he said. Narrator. The incident report was read. The body cam footage was summarized. Key timestamps narrated aloud by Fosse from the transcript, since the hearing was not equipped for video playback. Then Fosse looked across the table at Cross. Mr. Cross, you've submitted a written account. I'd like to give you the opportunity to speak to the panel directly regarding the events of Thursday afternoon. Cross looked at the panel. Fosse, Vento, Anand, then looked down at the folder in front of him. He opened it. I'll read from 3 documents, he said. I'll try to be brief. No one objected. The first document is the incident report GL-2209, filed by Officer Voss on the evening of the incident. He found the page. Under the section titled Subject's Actions Prior to Detention, the report states, and I quote, "Subject failed to identify himself as law enforcement prior to restraint being applied." End quote. He set the page down. I want to cross-reference that statement with the body cam transcript for Officer Voss. Badge 1147, a timestamp 16:53 and 34 seconds, which is 9 seconds after Officer Voss made initial contact with me at the scene. He found the second page. The transcript reads, verbatim, subject states, "Officer Voss, I'm Detective Darian Cross, Homicide Division. I'm holding the suspect for you. He's the shooter. The weapon has been cleared and set aside." He placed the 2 pages side by side on the table. 2 documents, 1 event, a direct contradiction. The room was quiet enough that the building's ventilation system was audible. Cross moved to the 3rd document. The dispatch coordination log, case GL 4417, the records at timestamp 16:54:11, which is 1 minute and 21 seconds after I identified myself on body cam. The following notation: caller information regarding on-scene individual forwarded to responding officer. The caller, identified in the log as Mira Santos, store employee, had reported in her 911 call that, quote, "The black man stopped the shooter," end quote, and identified the shooter as the individual in the tactical vest. Cross looked at the log. That caller information was transmitted to Officer Voss at 16:54:11. It is not referenced or acknowledged in the incident report. The body cam transcript records no radio response to that transmission. He set the log down. I was detained at 16:53. The caller information arrived at 16:54. Brett Lohman departed the scene, undetained, uncuffed, without any documentation of his identity being recorded. At 17:05, according to the store manager's subsequent statement to IA investigators. He paused. I remained in this building, in holding cell 4, 3 floors below my own desk, until 2035. He closed the folder. That's 6 hours and 35 minutes between the moment Officer Voss made her determination and the moment Captain Aldane corrected it, during which time the man who shot Ernie Bales was not in custody. He looked at the panel directly. The record shows what happened. I don't think I need to characterize it. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then Deputy Chief Vento said carefully, "Thank you, Mr. Cross." Anand, the civilian board member, was writing something on his notepad, or he didn't look up while he wrote. At the wall, Quay was also writing. She had not stopped writing since Cross began reading. Narrator. Crew's cross-examination of Cross lasted 40 minutes. It covered whether Cross had been in civilian clothing that could reasonably create ambiguity about his role, whether he had physically produced his badge at any point during the altercation with Lohman, as opposed to verbally identifying himself, whether his prior professional relationship with the situation, having physically subdued a suspect, created a scene that a responding officer could legitimately read as ambiguous. Cross answered each question with the same register, even specific, without elaboration beyond what the question required. You were in civilian clothing. Yes. And you had just physically restrained a man on the floor. I had neutralized an active shooter and was holding him for responding officers. Yes. A responding officer, arriving without prior context, might reasonably have seen a man in civilian clothes physically dominating another person on the floor of a grocery store. A responding officer, arriving without prior context, would also have heard 12 witnesses, including the store manager, immediately stating what had occurred. and would have had access to a clearly visible security camera at the entrance that recorded the entire sequence. The incident report notes neither of those things. Crew wrote something. Near, Officer Voss made a judgment call in a rapidly evolving situation. Officer Voss made a judgment call that contradicted available evidence. That distinction is what the panel is here to evaluate. Crew looked at him. Cross looked back. Crew moved on. Narrator. Voss's statement to the panel lasted 22 minutes. She described the scene as she had encountered it. She described her assessment. She described the decision chain, see, assess, act, that she had been trained to follow. She did not use the word mistake. She used the phrase reasonable assessment under dynamic conditions 4 times. Crew had coached her well, but she made one error, small, almost imperceptible. That Fosse caught and Cross caught and Quay at the wall, underlined twice on her legal pad. When Fosse asked her directly, "At what point did you first view the security camera footage from the Greenway Market entrance?" Voss paused before answering. Not long, perhaps 2 seconds. "I viewed it the following morning, when it was provided as part of the evidentiary materials." Fosse wrote something. Not at the scene? The scene was dynamic. My priority was securing the individuals present. The store manager directed your attention to the camera at the scene. That's documented in your own body cam footage. Another pause, shorter this time. I heard a comment from a bystander. In the moment, I was focused on securing the scene. Fosse looked at her over his reading glasses. The store manager is noted in the body cam transcript as standing behind the customer service counter, a fixed position, not a bystander in motion. He set his pen down. I'd like to return to this after we hear from the other witnesses. Crew interjected. My client has answered the question as asked. Noted, said Fosse, in exactly the same tone he had used with Crew 2 hours earlier. Narrator. Seong testified for 31 minutes. He read from his handwritten statement, the one he had written in the parking lot, in the car, with slightly unsteady hands, and then answered questions from Fosse and from Anand. He was precise. He did not editorialize. He confirmed the timestamps. He confirmed that he had asked Voss to verify the facts before proceeding, and that she had redirected him. When Crew asked him whether his judgment might have been influenced by his less experienced read of the dynamic scene, Seong, who was 4 years younger than Voss and 7 years her junior in seniority, Seong said, I had the same information Officer Voss had. I reached a different conclusion. I've documented what I observed and when I observed it. That's what I'm here to provide. Crew looked at his legal pad, decided not to push further. Anand asked one follow-up question. Officer Seong, in your experience, is there a standard procedure for verifying identity in a situation like this? Seong looked at him. Yes. You ask for the ID. If the person is physically secured, you access their wallet or credentials yourself. It takes approximately 30 seconds. Anand wrote something down. Narrator. The hearing adjourned at 2:40 p.m. without a panel decision. Fosse had told Cross this would happen. Preliminary findings will be issued within 30 days. But that was the language. That was the pace of this particular machine. People filed out of conference room 2B slowly, the release of 6 hours of compressed detention. Crew packed his legal pads. Voss stood at the window for a moment, looking at the parking garage roof, her back to the room. Cross gathered his folder, stood, looked at the 3 documents he had read from, now lying on the table in a neat row, and straightened them by habit into a clean stack before picking them up. Quay caught up with him in the corridor. Mr. Cross. He turned. She wasn't carrying her legal pad now. It was tucked under her arm, full pages visible from the side. She looked at him the way people who spend their careers inside systems look at people who have just demonstrated that they understand exactly how the system works without having been broken by it. The AG's office will be submitting an observer report within 2 weeks of this hearing, she said. I can't tell you what it will say, but I want you to know that the documentation you presented today is... She paused, choosing the word carefully. Thorough. Cross looked at her. The email, he said. The one to the unidentified account. We're working on it. Is Fosse working on it, or is the AG's office working on it? A pause. Both. He nodded. Thank you, Miss Quay. She nodded back, turned and walked toward the elevator. Cross watched her go. Then he took the stairs. A narrator. The panel's preliminary findings were issued 26 days later, 4 days ahead of the 30-day deadline, which Fosse told Cross afterward was unusual enough to note. The document ran 14 pages. The core findings in the language of the report itself. The panel finds that Officer Voss failed to employ available verification measures at the scene of case GL2209, including, but not limited to, review of on-site security camera footage, access to subjects' credentials, and acknowledgement of corroborating witness statements provided at the scene. The panel further finds that this failure resulted in the incorrect detention of a decorated department officer and the failure to detain the confirmed suspect in a shooting incident. The panel finds insufficient evidence at this time to determine whether Officer Voss's actions constituted deliberate misconduct or failure of judgment, and accordingly recommends that this determination be referred to the department's Conduct Review Board for a full evidentiary hearing. Pending that hearing, Officer Voss is suspended without pay, effective immediately. Voss would be suspended for 61 days before the Conduct Review Board issued its final recommendation. That recommendation, which Cross would not read for another 4 months, would determine whether termination proceedings were initiated or whether Voss was returned to duty under modified conditions. The preliminary findings also addressed Pardee. The panel finds that Administrative Officer Pardee's failure to expedite identity verification, despite the subject's repeated documented requests, represents a significant deviation from standard procedure. The panel further notes that the email communication sent by Officer Pardee at 17:06 on the date of the incident raises questions of institutional integrity that are beyond the scope of this disciplinary hearing and have been referred to the Office of the Attorney General for further review. Pardee submitted his resignation the morning the findings were issued. The letter was 3 sentences long and contained no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Whitmore received a formal written reprimand, the department's second lowest level of disciplinary action. The reprimand noted that her assessment of the incident report as procedurally compliant, made before the investigation was complete, represented a failure of supervisory judgment. Her job was not in jeopardy. Cross read the Whitmore section twice. Then he set the 14-page document on his desk, straightened it so its edges aligned with the edge of the desk, and opened his laptop to check the status of the Lohman prosecution. Narrator: Lohman had been charged by the Chatham County, Georgia DA's office with 1 count of aggravated assault in the gas station detainment and extradited to Florida within 3 weeks of his capture. The Halcourt County DA's office filed charges against him in Florida State Court, 1 count of attempted murder in the 2nd degree under Florida Statute Section 782.04, 1 count of aggravated battery with a firearm under Florida Statute Section 784.045, and 1 count of possession of a firearm by a prohibited person under Florida Statute Section 790.23. The DA's office had also referred Lohman's case to the FBI field office in Jacksonville, which had been monitoring him in connection with a separate inquiry. the nature of which was not disclosed in the public charging documents. The arraignment was scheduled. Lohman entered a plea of not guilty. His attorney filed for a bail reduction hearing. It would be months before any of this resolved, possibly longer. Cross knew this. He had closed enough cases to know that the arrest was the beginning of the legal process, not the end of it. The beginning of the long, grinding procedural machinery that moved at its own pace, regardless of how clear the evidence was or how obvious the outcome seemed from the outside. He documented the charges, logged the case number, put it in a folder, and kept working. Narrator. The civil lawsuit was filed 47 days after the incident. Cross had engaged an attorney, Priya Velankani, a civil rights litigator based in Tampa, who had handled 7 Section 1983 cases in the past 3 years. Not because he wanted a public legal battle, but because he understood that without documentation of the harm done, the harm would simply be administratively processed and filed away. The complaint named the City of Halcourt and Rachel Voss as defendants. It alleged violations of Cross's constitutional rights under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, specifically the Fourth Amendment, unlawful seizure, and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The city's legal department responded within the standard time frame. They did not deny the facts as documented. They argued, through their attorneys, that Officer Voss had acted within the scope of her discretionary authority and that qualified immunity under established case law shielded her from personal civil liability. Velankani filed her response to the qualified immunity argument 3 weeks later. It was 42 pages long. The core of her argument rested on a 2004 11th Circuit decision, Grater versus City of Auburn, which established that the right to be free from arrest without probable cause was clearly established law, and that no reasonable officer could believe an arrest was constitutional when exculpatory information was available and deliberately disregarded. The city's attorneys spent 10 days reviewing the filing. Then, they requested a settlement conference. Narrator. Cross did not attend the settlement conference himself. Velankani represented him. The conference lasted 3 hours and produced nothing final. Only the beginning of a negotiation that would take another 8 weeks to reach a number that both sides could document, without either side admitting what the number meant. The city ultimately agreed to a settlement of $475,000. No admission of wrongdoing. Velankani called Cross to tell him the final number. He was at his desk, working a separate case, when the call came in. He listened. Cross asked 2 questions about the specific language of the non-disclosure provisions, which Velankani had already pushed back on during negotiations, successfully narrowing their scope so that Cross retained the right to discuss the facts of the case publicly, even if he was restricted from characterizing the settlement as an acknowledgement of liability. He said he needed to think about it overnight. He talked to Adele that evening at the kitchen table after Mia had gone to bed. He laid out the numbers, the timeline, the likelihood of prevailing at trial versus the certainty of the settlement, the cost, not financial, of a trial that could stretch 2 more years. Adele listened to all of it. Then she said, "What do you want?" Cross looked at his hands on the table. "I want it on record," he said. "I want there to be something that can't be sealed or redacted or quietly filed away." Is there? He thought about the IA findings, the AG Observer report, which Quay's office had submitted and which was now a matter of public record, the body cam transcript, the FOIA documents, the email with "handled" in the subject line, sent at 5:13 p.m. to an account that Fosse's team was still working on. "Yes," he said, "there is." He accepted the settlement. Narrator. Yolanda Marsh published her first piece on the case 11 days after the incident, a reported account of the events at Greenway Market, drawing on Trey Hollis's footage, the dispatch log, witness statements from 4 customers who had been present, and the store manager's account. The piece ran 4,000 words and was accompanied by a timeline graphic, and it did not name Cross as a detective. It referred to him as the individual who intervened, because at that point, the department had not officially confirmed his identity, and Marsh operated with the discipline of someone who understood the difference between what she knew and what she could publish. The piece ran on the Tribune's front page. It was picked up by the Associated Press within 48 hours. Her second piece ran 3 weeks later, after the FOIA documents began coming through. It focused on the email chain, party to Hale, Hale to the unidentified address, and on the timeline of Party's notifications versus the timeline of Cross's requests for identity verification. It was the most read article in the Tribune's digital history. Her third piece, published 2 days after the IA preliminary findings were released, unnamed everyone. Cross by name, rank, and record. Voss by name and badge number. Party, Whitmore, Hale. It laid the documentation out in chronological order, the way Cross himself had laid it out in conference room 2B, and ended with a question that was not rhetorical. Gordon Hale received notification of Cross's booking at 5:11 p.m. He sent an email marked "Handled" at 5:13. He took no further documented action. Internal Affairs has referred this matter to the AG's office. The AG's office has confirmed the referral is active. No one has explained what Hale was handling or on whose behalf he was handling it. The Tribune's comment section received 11,000 responses in the first 24 hours. Marsh printed the response volume out and pinned it to the wall above her desk, and not because she was proud of the engagement, but because it reminded her that the story was not finished and that someone, somewhere, was going to keep reading until it was. Narrator: Gordon Hale placed himself on voluntary administrative leave 4 days after Marsh's third piece was published. He cited personal health reasons in the email to his department supervisor. The email was 3 sentences long and contained no acknowledgement of anything related to GL 2209. Fosse's team had, by that point, traced the unidentified email account to a server registered under a business entity in Tallahassee, a limited liability company with 1 listed member, a name that Fosse recognized from previous investigations as a political consultant who had done work for the City Council's Public Safety Committee. The implications of that connection were not something Fosse could pursue unilaterally. He documented what he had, filed it with the AG's office, and noted in his referral memo that additional investigative capacity would be required to trace the chain further. The AG's office assigned 2 additional attorneys to the referral. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, having monitored the Marsh coverage and the AG referral, made contact with the Halcourt PD's legal department on a Thursday morning, 68 days after the incident, to inquire about opening a pattern or practice investigation under 34 U.S.C. Section 12601. The letter from the DOJ was 3 pages long, professional, measured. It did not make any accusations. It simply asked a series of questions about department data, use of force statistics, complaint records, officer discipline outcomes, demographic breakdowns, and requested a response within 45 days. The Halcourt PD's chief forwarded the letter to the city attorney. The city attorney forwarded it to the mayor's office. The mayor's office issued a press statement the following afternoon stating that the city welcomed the DOJ's engagement and was committed to full cooperation. Whether that statement meant anything in practice, whether the data would be provided completely, whether the 45-day timeline would be honored, whether the pattern or practice investigation would ultimately produce enforceable findings or simply a report that was acknowledged and shelved, was not something anyone could answer yet. That was the nature of it. Cross read the press statement, noted the language, welcomed, committed, full cooperation, or the language of institutions that have learned to absorb pressure without being changed by it. He filed it with everything else. Narrator. 9 weeks after the incident, Cross submitted a formal proposal to Captain Aldane for revisions to the department's field identification protocol. The proposal was 4 pages. It cited 3 specific deficiencies identified by the GL-2209 incident, proposed concrete procedural changes for each, and attached a 1-page implementation timeline with cost estimates. Aldane read it the day he submitted it. She signed the forwarding memo to the chief's office that same afternoon. The protocol revision process, which required review by the department's policy committee, approval by the deputy chief, and a public comment period under Florida's government transparency requirements, would take approximately 4 months. Whether the revised protocol would actually change what happened in the next dynamic, ambiguous, high-pressure situation, whether it would change what a responding officer saw when they came through a door, was something no protocol could guarantee. Cross knew this. He submitted the proposal anyway. Because the proposal existed now. Because it was documented. Because when the next incident happened, and Cross was realistic enough about human institutions to understand that there would be a next incident, there would be a paper trail showing that the problem had been identified, named and addressed in writing, and someone would have to explain why the paper trail hadn't been enough. Narrator. On a Thursday morning, exactly 4 months after the afternoon he drove to Greenway Market to buy flour and Cheerios, Darian Cross was at his desk when his phone showed a call from a Florida area code he didn't recognize. He let it ring once, twice. Picked up on the 3rd ring. Cross. A pause. Then Yolanda Marsh's voice. Mr. Cross, I'm sorry to call directly. I got your number from... It doesn't matter. I need you to tell me if what I'm looking at is what I think it is. Cross sat back in his chair. What are you looking at? I received an envelope this morning. No postmark, no return address. Delivered to the Tribune's front entrance at some point overnight. Inside is a printout of an email thread. The same thread that came up in the FOIA materials. Pardee to Hale. But this copy has the full recipient line on Hale's outgoing message, the address to the Tallahassee account, and below that, she paused. There's a reply from that account, time-stamped 5:18 p.m. on the night of the incident. Cross was still. What does it say? Marsh read it aloud. It was 9 words. Confirmed. Leave him there. I'll handle the morning. Cross looked at the wall across from his desk. He didn't speak for a moment. Mr. Cross? I heard you. He took a breath. Don't publish it yet. I know. I need to verify it first. That's why I'm calling you. I need to know if the formatting, the metadata structure, matches what you saw in the IA materials. Send me a scan. I'll look at it within the hour. Thank you. Marsh. He waited. This goes to Fossey and to Quay's office before it goes anywhere else. Whatever you decide to do with it after that is your call. But they need to see it first. A pause. Agreed. She sent the scan. Cross opened it on his laptop. He compared the formatting against the version in his folder, the header structure, the server routing notation, the timestamp format. It matched. He called Fossey, forwarded the scan. Then he called Quay's direct line and told her what had arrived and where it had come from. Quay was quiet for 4 seconds. Do you know who sent it to the Tribune? No. Do you have any suspicions? Cross thought about Seong, the handwritten statement, the hallway, the 3-second pause before turning away. He thought about Okafor. Mr. Cross, is there anything I can do? And he thought about all the people inside institutions who see what is happening and make small, quiet decisions that no one ever celebrates. I have no information about that, he said. Which was true. Quay accepted that. We'll need to authenticate the document formally. That will take time. I understand. Mr. Cross? A pause. 9 words don't close a case. You know that. I know. But 9 words from the right timestamp, properly authenticated, attached to the right name. I know, he said again. She let the silence sit for a moment. We'll be in touch, she said, and hung up. Narrator. The authentication process took 3 weeks. The AG's digital forensics team confirmed that the email metadata was consistent with the server infrastructure of the Halcourt PD's outgoing mail relay. They confirmed the timestamp. They confirmed the originating account, the Tallahassee LLC, and traced the reply to a device registered to a specific IP address that had been used by that address on 2 prior occasions. The name attached to that IP registration was not Gordon Hale. It was a name that had not appeared anywhere in the public record of GL2209. That name, and the investigation that began to unspool from it, fell under the jurisdiction of the AG's office, and subsequently, the DOJ task force that had by that point been formally assigned to the Halcourt Pattern or Practice Review. Cross was briefed on the authentication findings by Fossey. He was told that the investigation was active and ongoing. He was told that he would likely be asked to provide additional testimony in the coming months. He was not told the name. He did not ask for it, and not because he didn't want to know, but because he understood, in the way that 12 years of building cases had taught him to understand, that knowing something before you're meant to know it can compromise the process by which knowing it becomes useful. He could wait. He had learned how to wait. Narrator. On a Friday afternoon, the last day of the month, 4.5 months after Greenway Market, Cross was at his desk finishing a report when Mia called on his cell phone. This was unusual. Mia was 8. She didn't call unless something was wrong or something was exciting, and the tone of her voice in the first syllable told him which one it was. Dad, guess what? What? Ms. Harrington said my project was the best one in the class. Cross leaned back from his keyboard. Yeah? She put it on the wall, in the hallway, so everyone can see it. What was the project? About someone who does something hard because it's right, even when it doesn't work out perfectly at first. A pause. I wrote about you, Mia said. Cross looked at the wall across from his desk, the same wall he had looked at when Marsh read him 9 words over the phone. The same wall that had received 12 years' worth of his attention, his cases, his work. He didn't say anything for a moment. Dad, are you there? I'm here. His voice was steady. That's good, Mia. That's really good. Ms. Harrington said she wants to meet you someday. Tell her I'd like that. After he hung up, he sat for a moment with the phone in his hand. Then he set it face down on the desk, turned back to his laptop, and kept working. On narrator. Kam Seong sent a text message to Cross on a Sunday evening, 6 weeks after the IA hearing, 2 weeks before the preliminary findings were issued. The message was 3 words. I'm sorry, man. Cross read it, looked at it for a moment, put his phone down on the kitchen counter. He didn't answer that night. He didn't answer the following morning either. He answered on the 3rd day, from the parking lot of the department, before he went in the brief window between the engine going off and the door opening. He typed 4 words: "Do better next time." Then he went inside. He didn't know if Seong would. He didn't know if the text was the beginning of something, or the end of something, or just a sound that needed to be made. He had stopped expecting people's redemptions to be clean. But the text existed. Miss Seong had chosen to send it. That was a data point. Cross filed it and kept moving. Narrator. Rachel Voss's Conduct Review Board hearing was scheduled for 5 months after the incident. The hearing would determine, based on the full evidentiary record, including the IA preliminary findings, the body cam transcript, the witness statements, the Seong documentation, and the forensic analysis of the dispatch logs, whether the department would pursue termination or return Voss to service under conditions. Cross would not be present at that hearing. It was not his proceeding. His involvement in the formal disciplinary process had ended with his testimony in conference room 2B. What the board would decide, he didn't know. Crew was still Voss's attorney, the police union was still paying Crew's fee, and the board's membership included 2 people who had worked with Voss for years. These were the forces that had always existed. They had not been eliminated by the evidence, or by the IA findings, or by the AG Observer Report, or by Marsh's coverage, or by the DOJ letter. They had simply been made visible, documented, and placed in the record. That was not the same as being neutralized. Cross knew this. He also knew that for the first time in the institutional history of GL 2209, there was a complete documented record: body cam, dispatch logs, witness statements, email chains, IA findings, AG report, DOJ inquiry, that made it significantly harder for the resolution to be invisible. Not impossible. Harder. The difference between those 2 things was not nothing. It was, in fact, everything he had been building towards since the moment he sat down on that metal bench in holding cell 4 and decided that what he could control was how clearly he thought, and what he documented, and how he waited. Narrator. Yolanda Marsh published the story about the 9-word email on a Wednesday morning, after the AG's authentication was complete, after Fossey had cleared the publication, after Quay's office had confirmed it would not compromise the active investigation to have the existence of the email in the public record. The headline was simple: "Leave him there." New email raises questions about who knew and when. The story ran 6,000 words. It named Hale. It described the authentication process. It explained, clearly, without speculation, what the email chain showed about the timeline of Thursday evening. And it ended with 2 paragraphs that Marsh had written and rewritten 11 times before she was satisfied. The investigation into who sent the reply. 9 words, 5:18 p.m., transmitted from a device whose registered address has been confirmed by the AG's digital forensics team, is ongoing. The AG's office has declined to comment on whether charges are anticipated or against whom. What is established in the documented record? A man stopped a mass shooting on a Thursday afternoon. He spent 6 hours and 35 minutes in a holding cell 3 floors below his own desk. The man he stopped walked free for 9 days. And at 5:13 p.m. that evening, someone who was not part of the operational chain of command sent an email that said the situation was handled. Handled by whom? For whom? That question remains open. And the story was shared 412,000 times in the first 24 hours. Marsh pinned the share count to the wall above her desk, below the earlier number. Then she opened a new document and started on the next piece. Narrator. 3 weeks after Marsh's story, Hale was placed on paid administrative leave pending the AG's investigation. The paid part of that was the detail that generated the most public response. letters to City Council, a protest outside the municipal building on a Tuesday afternoon. A petition with 47,000 signatures demanding unpaid suspension. The City Council held a public session to address the community response. Cross attended. He sat in the third row in civilian clothes and then listened to 4 council members make statements about accountability and transparency and the department's commitment to reform. He did not speak during the public comment period. He had said what he needed to say in conference room 2B, in front of a panel of 3, reading from 3 documents. That was where it needed to be said. The council chamber was a different kind of room for a different kind of purpose. But he listened. He noted which members said what. He noted the difference between members who spoke in specifics, citing the IA findings, the DOJ letter, the AG referral, and members who spoke in generalities about values and commitment. He noted which members asked questions and which members gave speeches. When it was over, he drove home. Adele was reading on the couch. Mia was asleep. He made himself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table for a while in the quiet. He thought about Ernie Bales, who had been discharged from Halcourt General, who had called the department to speak with Cross directly, who had said on the phone in a voice that was steady for a man who had nearly died, "I saw what you did. I want you to know I saw it." Cross had said, "I'm glad you're all right, Mr. Bales." Bales had said, "That's not nothing, son. What you did, that's not nothing." Cross had not known what to say to that. He had thanked the old man and let the silence sit for a moment, and then said he hoped the shoulder healed well. It was not nothing. He knew that. But knowing it didn't make what came after it easier to hold. The 6 hours and 35 minutes still happened. The door to cell 4 still closed. Nor Lohman still walked out of that supermarket. And somewhere in Tallahassee, on a device that was now in the possession of the AG's digital forensics team, someone had typed, "Leave him there," and considered the matter handled. That person did not yet have a name in the public record. The investigation was ongoing. The policy revision was in committee. The DOJ was still waiting for data. The Conduct Review Board was still scheduled. And Darian Cross was still in the same building, at the same desk, with the same coffee cup. A different coffee cup now, the old one thrown away. Still closing cases, still time-stamping his documentation, still writing everything down. Narrator. On a Friday evening, the last week of the month, Cross was locking his desk when Aldane stopped at the edge of his workspace. She looked at him for a moment the way she sometimes did. The way that meant she was choosing between 2 or 3 things she could say and deciding which one was actually worth the weight of the saying. "The protocol proposal," she said. "Policy committee approved it for public comment. Should be through by end of quarter." Cross looked at her. "Good. It's going to have your name on it, as the submitting officer." He picked up his keys. "That's standard." "Cross." She waited until he looked at her directly. "I want to say something, and I need you to let me say it without redirecting me to the next item." He set his keys down, gave her the full attention she was asking for. "What happened to you was wrong." She said it without the softeners that institutional language usually insists on. What occurred, the events of, and the situation involving, just wrong. Not procedurally suboptimal, not a failure of communication, wrong. And I want you to know that I was 3 floors up and I didn't know. And that is something I carry. Cross looked at her. "You came when Okafor called you," he said. "I should have come sooner." "You didn't know sooner. I should have known." Her voice didn't waver, but something in the set of her jaw showed the effort of that steadiness. "I'm your captain. That's my job, to know." Cross was quiet for a moment. Aldane. He picked up his keys again. You came when you knew. That matters. She looked at him. He could see the specific weight of a person who has decided not to let themselves off easy, who has decided to carry something because they believe carrying it is the only honest response. He understood that, and he carried things too. Good night, Captain, he said. Good night, Cross. He walked out. The elevator was slow, it always was. So he took the stairs. All 4 flights. Came out into the evening air on Calder Street. The streetlights had just come on. The building behind him was lit in every window of every floor. Somewhere inside it, the documentation of GL 2209 was stored in a secured evidence folder with dual access authentication. Somewhere inside the AG's office in Tallahassee, 2 attorneys were working on a referral memo. Somewhere in a courtroom calendar, Brett Lohman had a hearing date. Somewhere on a desk in a Tribune office, Yolanda Marsh had a new document open. And somewhere, in a location that no one in the public record had yet identified, a device was sitting with a sent email on it. 9 words, 5:18 p.m., and a name attached to the account. The investigation was ongoing. Cross walked to his car. He drove home. Narrator. 2 days later, on a Sunday, Marsh received another envelope. No postmark, no return address. Slid under the Tribune's side door sometime before the morning staff arrived. Inside, 1 page, a screenshot of a text message exchange. 2 numbers, neither of them identified. The exchange was 6 messages long. It had occurred on the Thursday evening of the incident, between 4:59 p.m. and 5:22 p.m. The last message in the exchange, sent at 5:22, read, "Boss won't check. She never does with them. We're good." Marsh looked at the page for a long time. She had been a reporter for 16 years. She had learned not to let the size of a story make her move faster than the documentation warranted. She had learned that the envelope that arrives when you are not expecting it is either the most important thing you will ever receive, or the thing that ends your credibility. And the difference between those 2 outcomes is how carefully you treat what's inside it. She put the page in a folder, labeled it, logged it, then she called Fosse. "I received something this morning," she said. "I think you need to see it before I do anything else." Fosse asked her to bring it in. She was in his office at 9:45 a.m. The page sat on his desk between them. Fosse read it twice, the second time more slowly, then sat back. "We'll need to authenticate the screenshot," he said. "Same process." "How long?" "Weeks, minimum." Marsh looked at the page. "The phone numbers, can you trace them?" "That requires a warrant, which requires probable cause, which requires—" He paused. "Time, and a judge who is willing to sign it." Marsh nodded. She had expected this. This was how it worked. Every door opened to another room with a locked door. "Is the investigation still active?" she asked. "Yes." "A G still involved?" "Yes." "DOJ?" A slight pause. "The DOJ task force is still collecting data. Their 45-day response window from the city closed last week. We're waiting to see what they do with the response." Marsh stood up, picked up her bag, left the folder on Fosse's desk. "I'll wait on this one," she said, "until you tell me I can move." Fosse looked at her. There was something in his expression, not quite gratitude, but the acknowledgement of a person who has spent their career inside a system and has learned to recognize the specific value of someone outside it, who understands how not to break things that aren't ready to be broken. "Thank you," he said. She left. The folder sat on Fosse's desk. He looked at it for a moment, Then he opened his desk drawer, took out a fresh evidence envelope, and placed the page inside it. He sealed it, wrote the date, initialed the seal. Then he put it in the locked cabinet where the rest of GL2209's materials lived, and it joined everything else that was documented, authenticated, preserved, and waiting. Narrator. The Conduct Review Board hearing was held on a Tuesday. Cross was not there. He was at his desk, working a separate case, a residential burglary that had turned into something more complicated, just the way cases sometimes did when you looked at them long enough. He was cross-referencing 2 pawn shop receipts against a stolen property database, and he was doing it with the same focused attention he brought to everything, which was the only speed he knew how to work at. He found out the board's decision the following morning. Aldane told him in the corridor before he reached his desk. Voss would not be returning to active duty. The board had determined, by a 2-to-1 vote, that the evidentiary record supported a finding of serious conduct violations. Termination proceedings would be initiated under the department's disciplinary charter. Crew would appeal, of course. That was what Crew was for. The appeal process would take months, possibly longer. Maybe there was a meaningful chance the termination would be reduced to a different outcome on appeal. A demotion, a lengthy suspension, a return under restrictions. These things happened. These things happened more often than the people who watched from outside the system understood. But the board had voted. The finding existed. It was in the record. Cross listened to Aldane, nodded when she finished. "The policy proposal," he said. "Is it still on track for end of quarter?" She looked at him. The half smile, the real one, not the performative kind. "Yes." "Good." He went to his desk, sat down, opened the pawn shop receipts, and kept working. Narrator. 3 months later, 7 months and 11 days after he walked into Greenway Market to buy flour and Cheerios, Darian Cross gave one interview. One, to Yolanda Marsh, in the Tribune's conference room, on a Tuesday afternoon, on the record. He spoke for 1 hour and 20 minutes. He talked about what happened in the supermarket. He talked about the holding cell, the specific quality of that fluorescent light, the specific weight of sitting in a room he had walked past hundreds of times from the other side of the door. He talked about the receipt, about what he wrote on the back of it and why he kept it. He talked about Ernie Bales, who was managing the shoulder injury, who had started going to physical therapy, who had told Cross when they spoke that he watched the news every morning now, which he hadn't done before, because he felt like he owed it to himself to pay attention. He talked about Mia, briefly, only what he chose to share. He did not talk about the ongoing investigations. He had agreed with Fosse and Quay that he would not discuss the email chain or the text message screenshot or the name that was developing in the AG's referral file like a photograph in a dark room, slowly, chemically, irrevocably emerging into visibility. There were things that needed to stay in the process. That was the nature of the process. He respected the process, even when the process was slow and uncertain and offered no guarantees. When Marsh asked him what he wanted people to understand from what had happened to him, Cross looked at the table for a moment before answering. That the documentation matters. He said it without dramatic emphasis, just as a fact, the way he stated all the things he believed most firmly. Every request I made in booking, every time I said verify my identity, on every timestamp I recorded on that receipt, those things existed. They couldn't be argued away. When Aldane came downstairs, she came because Okafor told her. When Fosse built the case, he built it from documents that I had created or that the system had created and hadn't thought to destroy. The documentation is what turns what happened into something that can't just be quietly processed and filed. Marsh looked at him across the table. And the things that can't be documented? Cross was quiet for a moment. The thing Voss decided when she looked at me. He said it evenly. That's not in any document. That's in her, in what she saw and what she concluded from it. You can document the consequences of that. You can't document the thing itself. A pause. That's the part I live with. Marsh nodded. She didn't write anything while he said it, just listened. Is that an answer? He asked. Yes, she said. That's the answer. Narrator. The article ran on a Sunday. 12,000 words. Front page continued inside. A photograph of Cross, his choice, taken outside the department on Calder Street, in the same gray t-shirt he had worn that Thursday afternoon, standing in front of the building with his hands at his sides, not smiling, not performing anything, just standing there. The photograph was Marsh's idea. He had agreed to it because he understood what she was trying to say with it. This is the building. This is the man. He is still here. The article was the most widely read piece in the Tribune's history, surpassing even her second story. It won a state journalism award the following year. Marsh accepted it on a Thursday, a choice that no one mentioned was intentional, but that everyone who knew her understood was. Cross did not attend the ceremony. He was working. Narrator. The name in the AG's referral file became public 8 months after the incident. It was released as part of a charging document, a federal criminal complaint filed in the Northern District of Florida, alleging 1 count of conspiracy to deprive civil rights under 18 U.S.C. Section 241, arising from the events of GL2-209 and 2 prior incidents that the AG's investigation had surfaced during its review of the Halcourt PD's pattern or practice data. The defendant was not Gordon Hale. Hale was named as an unindicted co-conspirator, a designation that meant the evidence supported his involvement, but that the charging decision, more in the prosecutorial judgment of the U.S. Attorney's Office, focused on the individual whose direction Hale had been operating under. That individual, whose name filled the top line of the federal charging document, was a city council member who had served on the Public Safety Committee for 9 years, who had attended 3 department award ceremonies where Cross had been recognized, who had spoken at a press conference about community policing 6 weeks before the Greenway Market shooting. The charging document ran 41 pages. Page 11 contained a reproduction of the 9-word email and the 7-word text message, with a chart showing how both communications had originated from devices traceable to accounts registered in the defendant's name or the name of entities linked to the defendant. On page 23 contained a reproduction of a prior incident from 14 months earlier, in which the same pattern of email communication had occurred in connection with a complaint filed by a black officer against a white sergeant. That complaint had been administratively closed without finding within 3 weeks. The officer who had filed the complaint had transferred to another department 6 months later. Cross read the charging document from beginning to end. He sat at his desk and read all 41 pages, then set it down and looked at the wall for a while. He thought about the name on page 1. He had seen that name at 3 award ceremonies. He had shaken that person's hand. He had stood at a microphone and received a commendation plaque while that person stood in the 3rd row applauding. He sat with that for a moment, and then he picked up the document, straightened its pages, and filed it in the GL2209 folder. The folder was thick now, rubber-banded because it didn't fit flat anymore. He put it in his desk drawer, locked the drawer, and went back to the case he had been working before the charging document arrived in his email. Narrator. The federal case would take time. Federal cases always took time. The defendant had retained a defense attorney with 30 years of criminal trial experience. There would be motions. There would be discovery disputes. There would be delays. There might be a plea. There might be a trial that lasted 3 weeks and produced a verdict that everyone watched and that still left the systemic architecture, the machinery that had allowed this to function for 9 years, largely intact. Cross knew all of this. He had been inside institutions long enough to know that a charging document, however thorough, was not the end of anything. It was a beginning, a slow, procedurally bound beginning with no guaranteed destination. But it existed. The 41 pages existed. The authentication existed. The email existed. The 9 words existed. The 513 timestamp existed. The chain of custody existed. From Trey Hollis's phone to the AG's server, from Pardee's terminal to the forensics team's analysis, from Seong's handwritten statement to the locked file cabinet in Fosse's office. All of it existed. All of it was real. All of it was in the record. And the record, unlike memory, unlike perception, unlike the split-second decision that a person makes when they look at another person and decide in the space of one breath what that person is, the record did not fade. It did not accommodate convenient revision. It did not look the other way. It was simply there. Patient, fixed, complete, waiting for the process to catch up to what it already contained. Narrator. On a Thursday evening, the same day of the week as Greenway Market, though no one marked it, Darian Cross drove home from the department at a normal hour for the first time in 2 weeks. He pulled into the driveway, turned the engine off, sat for a moment. The house lights were on. He could see movement in the kitchen window. Adele, probably starting dinner. Through the living room window, the blue flicker of the television. Mia, almost certainly watching something she had seen enough times to quote. He sat in the quiet of the car and thought about nothing in particular for approximately 90 seconds. Then he got out, walked to the front door, put his key in the lock. It turned smoothly, the way it always did. One rotation, clean and final. He pushed the door open. Inside, the smell of something cooking. The sound of the television. Adele's voice from the kitchen saying something he couldn't quite make out. Mia from the couch, not looking up. Dad's home. He hung his keys on the hook by the door, took his jacket off. "Hey," he said. Mia looked up from the screen. "Did you remember we're out of cereal?" He stopped. He had forgotten the flour. He had forgotten it on the day of Greenway Market, and he had never gone back for it. And somewhere in the subsequent months, it had become one of those small domestic facts that the larger events had quietly displaced. "I'll get it this weekend," he said. "And the Cheerios." "And the Cheerios." Mia looked at him for a moment, with the specific evaluative attention of an 8-year-old who has been watching the adults around her calibrate and recalibrate and is developing her own read of when the calibration is complete. "Okay," she said, and looked back at the television. Cross walked into the kitchen. Adele was at the stove. She looked over her shoulder when he came in. "You're home early." "Relatively." She looked at him for a moment. The 12-year version of looking at him, and the one that had learned not to ask every question that occurred to her because she trusted him to eventually say the ones that needed to be said. "How was it today?" Cross leaned against the counter, crossed his arms, thought about the answer to that question, which had more layers than the question usually carried. "The policy proposal cleared committee," he said. "It goes to public comment next month." Adele turned back to the stove. "That's good." "Yeah." He watched her work for a moment. "That's good." He pushed off the counter and went to set the table for dinner. Narrator. That same evening, in the offices of the Hull Court Tribune, Yolanda Marsh was still at her desk. The envelope from 2 months ago, the one with the text message screenshot, still in the authentication queue at the AG's office, was on her mind. Fossey had told her last week that the digital forensics analysis was nearly complete. She expected to hear from him within the next 10 days. She had 2 notebooks open on her desk. One contained the documented record of GL2209, every piece she had written, every FOIA document, every hearing citation. The other contained the questions that remained unanswered. The questions outnumbered the answers by a ratio that had actually improved since she began. When she started, the known-to-unknown ratio was approximately 1 to 15. Now it was closer to 1 to 3. That was progress. Real, documented, verifiable progress. But 3 open questions was still 3 open questions. She looked at the second notebook. The top question on the list, the one she had written first, the one she had never crossed off, read, "Who sent the envelopes?" She had thought about this a great deal. She had not been able to resolve it. The people she suspected, the ones who had been inside the building that Thursday, the ones who had seen what she had seen and chosen differently, had never confirmed anything. She had no way to compel them to. She might never know. She sat with that for a moment. Then she closed the second notebook, opened her laptop, and started writing the next piece. About the federal charging document, about the defendant's history on the Public Safety Committee, about the 14-month-old prior incident on page 23. There was still work to do. There was always still work to do. That was not a complaint. That was a description of what accountability looked like when you got close enough to see it clearly. Not a destination that was reached and settled, but a process that was maintained, document by document, question by question, day by day. She typed. Outside, the city was doing what cities do, moving, generating, producing the friction that eventually became the evidence, that eventually became the record. The record accumulated. It was patient. And somewhere in the GA's office, in a secured folder with a case number she had long since memorized, an envelope sat sealed and initialed, containing a page with 7 words on it and 2 phone numbers, and the digital ghost of a decision that someone had made on a Thursday evening while a decorated detective sat in a holding cell 3 floors below his own desk. "We're good," it said. The envelope did not agree.